how business models and strategies must change to create value in new ways. A lot of them showed up in the pandemic, a lot of great examples. And this was a particularly good one. Chipotle, what does this have to do with it? I'll tell you what. When the pandemic arrived, they were faster than any competitor in saying, okay, our world has changed. Nobody's going to come into any of our restaurants for a long time. So they turbocharged a program they already had in place, and they spent millions of dollars building additional kitchens in their restaurants just for pickup and delivery. They added lanes around their restaurants that were just for pickup and delivery. At a time when other restaurants were going out of business, they hired thousands of people in 2020, thousands more in 2021. They faced the new reality and embraced it faster than anyone else. In those first 2 years, 2020 and 2021, 100,000 restaurants went out of business in the United States. And I say went out of business, they're not coming back. In that same time, this company's stock price hit new all-time highs. That's one real example. Here's another very different one. This is from a little company in Chicago called Record-A-Hit Entertainment. And their business is they roll out this kind of stuff for events that companies or other organizations like to put on. Bring families together, have some fun and stuff like that. Well, you can imagine when the pandemic hit, this business went to zero, right? Nobody's going to climb around in one of those things during a pandemic. The business went to zero. Nobody wanted to rent the Chuggy Choo Choo Crawl Through inflatable. Right? Nobody wanted to rent the Big Stinka Bounce House. Although why anybody would want to rent this at any time, I don't know. They tell me it's actually very popular. I don't care, I'm going back to the other slide. Okay? This went to zero. What are they going to do? Well, what they did was they figured out what they could do online for events that people could get together with online. And so they came up with a digital casino night. You can do that online. A digital escape room where people could compete to get out of the escape room online. Kids were going back to college. Freshmen coming in who'd never seen the campus, and they weren't going to see it because it was all remote. So they made games where teams of incoming freshmen could compete to find places on the campus. It was clever, and it was enough to keep them alive during the pandemic. And what's important is what they did is still paying off. What Chipotle did is still paying off. But they had to think of new ways to create value. Here's another example. That's a Tesla Model S. You might remember that some years ago, Tesla was having a problem that car makers just really don't like, which is cars bursting into flames. Okay? This is just never a good thing. Nothing good about it. This happened in Washington State. 2 weeks later, same thing in Tennessee. We all know what happens then. The regulators open an investigation. They figure out what went wrong. When they do, they order a recall. It costs the manufacturer millions of dollars and damages their reputation. Except that none of it happened. What happened was, when they started looking into what was wrong, they found out what it was, which was at highway speed, the front of the car automatically would lower to make the car more aerodynamic, get longer range on the charge. Okay. Well, when the car was in that attitude, if it ran over a bit of metal, a bolt or something, and it kicked up in just the wrong way, it hit the battery pack, which, as you know, is across the bottom of these vehicles. And that caused the fire. Nobody was hurt, but still, they found the problem. And when they found it, they sent a software update over the cell network to all the affected cars, raising the front of the car by 1 inch at highway speed. When they did that, the problem disappeared. The regulators closed the investigation. There was no recall. They didn't have to send all those cars back to the dealers, which is a good thing because they don't have dealers, as you probably know. They just have showrooms. They had used software and the cell network to take the friction out of fixing a car. Beyond that, the showroom deal took some of the friction and a lot of the capital out of selling a car because they didn't have billions of dollars of working capital sitting on lots across the country. And as all car makers are finding out now, the electric technology is fundamentally simpler than internal combustion technology. Well, you put all that together, and this company was able to create more value. And when I say value, I'm not referring to their current stock price, okay? I'm no analyst, but I think it's crazy, all right? But nonetheless, they created more value per employee, more value per dollar of capital than any of the incumbent players did. They created value in new ways. Here's another example, a completely different one, but also inspiring. This is now actually a historic artifact. It's something that Amazon made for several years. They call it a dash button. It's about 3 inches long. It has adhesive on the back so that you can stick it wherever you want. You get it set up, and the way it works is you hit that button, and 2 days later, there's a box of Tide at your front door. Okay? That's it. That's what it did. The general feeling in the technology world was this was about the dumbest idea of all time. It was an internet-connected device that did one thing. It ordered Tide. But turns out that a lot of companies wanted to have one of these things too, right? They wanted to have one for copier paper and dog food. Pringles, you don't want to run out of those, right? So there were all these things. And this came from the company that invented and patented one-click buying. And yet, somebody over there got to thinking, you know, that one-click buying, it's just too hard. I mean, you got to get online, you got to find the product, you got to move the cursor over to the other side, you've got to click. It's too much trouble. So they invented this. But as I said, it's a historic artifact. Now they don't make this anymore because they came up with something better, which is the Echo speaker system and the Alexa digital assistant. Now that you've got that set up in your house, you don't have to go to all the trouble of hitting that button. All you have to do, no matter where you are in your house, the moment the thought enters your mind, you just say, Alexa, order Tide. And 2 days later, or 1 day, or now maybe the same day, there's a box of Tide at your front door. And if anybody had any Alexa apps open, I might have just ordered you some Tide, in which case I apologize. All right. They never stopped looking for ways to create new value in new ways. Here's one more example, of a completely different time. How many people know what this is at all? Yeah, quite a few admit to knowing what this is, right? Candy Crush is a game, for those who don't know. It's a game that you can download onto your phone for free and that you can play on your phone for free as long as you want, as much as you want. Now you say, well, that's nice, but how is that a business, right? Well, as those of you who play the game know, it's this typical kind of thing where you have to do some tasks, and once you do them, then you move to a higher level where doing those tasks is a little more difficult. And if you do that, then they move you to a higher level, and it's getting more difficult. And as you get further and further up, eventually, you get to a level where you just can't do it. You just can't do what you need to do to advance. And at this point, you're emotionally invested in it, and so you're really going crazy that you can't get to the next level. You don't have enough lives. You just can't do it. Well, when that happens, you can touch a little button up in the corner, and it will give you new lives or levels. And your credit card will be charged, okay? All you have to do is touch that button. Okay. It's a very popular game. It was the #1 download for years on Apple and Android. Now, the company that made Candy Crush decided to go public. And so they had to publish their financials. And that's when we learned that people were buying lives and levels on Candy Crush to the tune of $1.2 million a day. Okay. It was unbelievably successful. You could do this for free, but people were paying $1.2 million a day. Eventually, the company was bought by Activision Blizzard, the giant game company, some years later. They paid $6 billion for this company. Okay. What's the point? By the way, a lot of companies, now a lot of games now use this same model, but these were the pioneers. What's the lesson? The lesson is, what would you or I have said if somebody came to us and said, I've got this great idea for a business? We would have said, that's the most ridiculous idea I ever heard in my life. But it wasn't. It was brilliant. And in an era of advancing technology, we have to be open to ideas that we might not think make any sense at all, because there are more and more examples like this one.